Hey everyone, Cone here. Wanted to give a debrief on the Rolex 24 at Daytona. Myself, Dux, Jolo, and my previous roommate, he doesn't have a internet name, so we will pretend that he doesn't exist, all went to Daytona for me and Dux, I believe, 7th year in a row? Something like that, for the Daytona Rolex 24. This year promised to be pretty interesting with a lot of new changes to things happening with IMSA, things happening with the whole sports car scene at the moment. There's a lot of turmoil, I guess is one word you could use, but there's a lot of change-ups happening right now that are happening all throughout motorsports, but sports car racing in general is in a pretty weird spot right now, especially here in the States, and we'll get into more of that as I go on here. But as for the event, as you might suspect, I'm a pretty big fan of IMSA, of not so much World Endurance Championship, but of road racing in general. So this is a pretty big event for me. It's definitely the biggest of, I think, the American endurance races. So it's cool that we live close enough to it that we get to experience that every year. My favorites going into this would have been the Delta Wing. I really like the principle of that. It's so cool to see something innovative, different, rule breaking, doesn't fit the mold competing on that level. You don't see that anywhere else in basically any other form of motorsports. So it's cool that we have that kind of program here in the States. I really like the Speed Source guys. I have been a big fan of them since, I think 2007 would have been our first year going. And they were running the Mazda RX-8s at the time with the 3 rotors, fantastic sounding cars, and they're just really cool people. They always, at the time, they always made sure to have a very good presentation, make sure they can interact with the fans, you can interact with the cars, stuff like that. They really went above and beyond there. And the past few years, you can tell they're struggling. They really went down a weird path with the diesel prototypes, even the diesel GT, what was it, GTX? I think it was GTX. I don't remember. But yeah, that's a very strange diesel program that never took off. They tried basically using street engines in race cars, and it just was not very successful. And the team has suffered from that lack of success. Obviously, they're not getting the funding they once were, and they just don't seem as enthusiastic about it as they once did. But with the new gas engines that they're running this year, they're running a AER-built 4-cylinder in those cars now. It's still a challenge. They're still using a 2-liter 4-cylinder up against the bigger V6s and even the V8s and the prototypes, or the Daytona prototypes. So I'm hoping they can find some success with that car and hopefully get, the ball rolling with Speed Source again. I'd like to see them do well. On the GT side, there's no hiding the fact that I am a Viper fanboy, so I am, of course, pulling for the Riley Viper team, not only because I love Vipers, but because I love that team said, you know what, the heck with you, Dodge. I don't care that you're dropping out of motorsports completely. Thanks for that, Dodge, by the way. We're going to continue to run these cars because we think they're great, and we put a lot of work into them, and we still think they can win. And I'll be darned if they have not done very well with that car. So I am always pulling for them, even if they do have some bizarre sponsorship from some weird Discovery TV show that I couldn't care any less about. In GT Le Mans, which is the faster of the GT category, we have the new Ford GT debuting this year. It's not a car I'm terribly excited about. Really hate the engine. Oh my god, do I hate that engine. And, I mean, it looks kind of cool. I'm just not really a Ford guy to begin with, so I struggle to get excited about that car. In GTLM in general, I don't really have an outright favorite. It's just kind of a class that I watch, and through the race, I'll usually pick a favorite. So we are, of course, at Daytona, which means we are at the new stadium. They kept preaching that the whole time we were there, that it's the world's first motorsports stadium. They added some nice amenities to the grandstands and made them taller. It's the same Daytona it's always been. The grandstands are much more comfortable, but for Rolex, we don't spend a whole heck of a lot of time in the grandstands anyway. So, to me, it was pretty underwhelming, especially since we've been going every year. We've seen the progress. We knew what it was going to be like. But hey, you don't have to pee in a trough when you're in the grandstands anymore, so that's something. The worst part about Daytona is the staff there, the way they run the event. It really feels like you're at some kind of amateur carnival the whole time. Like the crowd control and the staff around, the fans have no idea what they're doing. There's no organization. The prime example of that is the grid walk, where everybody from the infield that has a garage pass can go out to the tri-oval area and walk along the grid, stand on the track and stuff like that. Something they've always done, and every year it just gets worse and worse. This year we couldn't even get to the track because there was all the gates on pit road that they could have opened. They only opened one. They didn't tell anybody where that gate was, so it's just mass chaos. And the whole time you're there, that's the kind of feeling you get. And every year I hear older gentlemen getting very upset with it. People that you can tell were like people that go to Le Mans or go to bigger race events and they come here. It's kind of embarrassing for me as a fan of IMSA, as a fan of the Daytona Rolex 24, because it just doesn't represent it very well. It doesn't represent it as that kind of global importance race. It just feels very amateurish, which is disappointing. But beyond that, Daytona is a fantastic place to watch a road race. The road course is extremely accessible. Obviously, the grandstands, you can see everything. You can see the whole track. You don't get that in many road courses. Not the most interesting road course in the world, but it's still a great place to watch a race. We went Thursday through Sunday, so we got to check out, unfortunately on Thursday the weather was just awful, so we didn't get to check out much of anything. That's the day that I would like to be touring the garages and such. A lot of that didn't happen. Friday we would have the Continental Series, which is a series that is struggling at the moment. It kind of took me by surprise. There's been a steady decline in it. Pirelli World Challenge is killing it lately. They have just tons of entries. All of the entry-level pro racers in America are going Pirelli World Challenge, which is a drastic flip-flop from what it was 7 years ago, when there was 100 cars plus in this Continental's field, and now we're seeing maybe 25 to 30. In the Grand Sport, they only had 8 in the race. So, unfortunately, that meant the Grand Sport race, not terribly entertaining, and there's just not a lot of diversity in the field, so that is unfortunate. Would love to see that series come back to some of its previous, success. It's great entry-level endurance racing. It's just probably too expensive. The shorter sprint format of the Pirelli World Challenge is definitely excelling at the moment. They're going to have to do something, because that series will not survive in the state it is in right now. And that's just kind of the nature of that kind of road racing. I've seen that ebb and flow for the past 2 decades, where World Challenge really becomes successful. Whatever the Continental Tire Challenge, whatever they call that series, the two just kind of flip-flop back and forth. Whichever one is doing better at the moment, we'll get all the cars in it, and then the other one will take them. Hopefully we'll get that series up and running again soon. That would, even if it just comes back a little bit, we get a little bit more of an entry for at least Daytona. If they're only getting 8 cars for Daytona, they're really going to be hurting as the season goes on to the less important races. Ferrari Challenge does very well. They get a ton of cars. That's been increasing every year. That is a Pro-Am series. It's basically a pay drive series where anybody that has the money can go buy these cars, rent the car for the weekend and compete. That series has gone from 10, 15 cars to this year it was like 40. That's good, but it's just those races are extremely short. They're only 30 minutes. There's only 2 of them that weekend. And I think the one race that we saw, they saw 3 laps of green flag, maybe 4. So that could be a cool series. We got to make those races a little bit longer so we can get some green flag running. That would be very good for it. One of the newer things this year is the fact that we have GT3 rules in GTD, which is the lowest class of the Rolex IMSA field, and that is a big improvement because it allows a lot more cars into the running, and you can run those cars in all sorts of series, so we can get people interested in coming over just for the endurance championship or maybe running the full season. It just opens up a lot of new opportunities. Unfortunately, this year we haven't seen too many of those yet. This is still very new. We had a couple new cars. Let's see, we had the Lamborghinis, which were the Hurricanes, and we had a few of those, I think 5 of those in total. Then we have the Lexus, which is not quite ready. They didn't get it ready for Daytona. That'll be ready for Sebring, so I'm told, or so I'm thinking. Other than that, it was pretty much the normal. Porsche brought the replacement for the GT America, which is just the GT3 spec 911. Pretty much the same car. It's a little quieter, which is sad. I love the sound of those NA super loud 911s. The GTLM 911s, they sound fantastic. They are just awesome sounding cars, and it's like nothing else. So that's the only difference really for the GT3 ones. GT3 is one of those things that is a balance of power rules. Any car can compete, and then they just kind of nerf them or buff them into being close in competition. That works pretty well all over the world. Here we had a little bit of a problem where one of the cars, the new Lamborghinis, they weren't very fast in testing. They were like 10 miles an hour slower down the straights. And then when it came race time, they were running so much faster that they were actually nearly outrunning the faster GT Le Mans cars in the race. It was visible to us as spectators. It was very visible to the drivers throughout the whole race. That was one of the things on Twitter, just around the track, that we kept hearing about the most. Even the announcers were like, what is going on with these cars? Because they were exorbitantly faster, especially down the straightaways. So something was going on there. Somebody was doing some sandbagging or something. Overall, I have pretty high hopes for the GT3, GTD class. I think that is going to be a very good change, and I expect by next year we have a nice field of GT3 cars, and that will be very good. As for the race highlights for me, absolutely, without a shadow of the doubt, the highlight for me was the drive that Catherine Legg in the Delta Wing put in the first quarter of the race. The first stint specifically, they started last in the prototype field, and by lap 8 or so, she had already worked her way up to 3rd, and it was all on-track passes. There was no pit strategy or anything like that. It was nothing like I've seen before at Daytona, at Rolex. Just an absolute blitz drive to the front, very clean, great passes. Car was just a rocket ship out of the infield. As soon as it got out of the infield to the banking, it would just take off down towards the bus stop, and just great passes there all weekend. That were all race that it got to run. Unfortunately, as most of you probably know by now, the Delta Wing got crashed by a parked PC car in turn 1, and that was the end of its race, which was a darn shame, because I really think that if it had stayed together, because we all know its reliability issues, and if nothing had happened, had a very good chance of winning the race. And it, in the crowd, in the stands, the Delta Wing made some fans, because there was more cheering and clapping and people excited about that car than I've ever heard at Rolex, other than like family members. Like, you can tell people are there because they're like family members of drivers and they get excited. No, the whole crowd was excited about the Delta Wing. So that would have been great if it had been able to finish the whole race and had won the race. It would have been an extremely exciting moment. Throughout the whole field, there was a lot of interesting dynamics with the class balancing. They're all very close in times at the moment. There used to be a huge, when we first started going, there was only 2 classes. There was Prototype and GT. And there was a huge gap in time between them. And they never really, you always have with endurance racing like this, the dynamic of people getting in each other's way, the faster cars dealing with the slower cars. Here, it was like everybody was in everybody's way all the time, because they're all running within basically 5 to 10 seconds of the lap of each other. And then once you slow down, once you start, backing off a little bit during the night, things like that, everybody's running very similar times, made for just I could just tell watching it, it would be very frustrating for drivers because you'd be in a prototype and then you'd have a prototype challenge car that's, having the same cornering speed as you, and then you'd have a GTLM car that was faster than you off the turn, but then the GTD car would be faster at the end of the straightaways, and, there was just no set picking order of who's fastest here, and that would make it really frustrating as a driver, I could tell. It made for interesting... Hi, cat. Apparently I have a cat now. As a spectator, it was pretty interesting to watch. I mean, it made for a lot of on-track action. I just think that maybe we need a little bit more balancing there. The absolute highlight of the race is obviously the Corvette Battle at the end. GTLM was an absolutely awesome class to watch the whole time. They were all very close with each other. Everybody had an opportunity to lead at some point. Every car seemed very well balanced. Some people just ran the race a little bit better than others. The Corvette guys at Daytona, in my memory, have always struggled a little bit with having on-track incidents or parts failures. This time they were just rock solid. You hardly even knew they were there for the first 20 hours or so. But then at the end, they just came alive and just shot to the front. But when they shot to the front and passed the Porsches, they didn't just go, okay, we're 1-2 now, this is how we're going to finish. They said, nope, go ahead, duke it out. Don't hit each other, don't take each other out, but fight for the win all you want. And they did for a good half hour. And it was fantastic to watch. Obviously, it made for good TV, but it was even awesome to watch at the track, watching them every lap, dive bombing each other into turn one. And then obviously the close finish was great. Probably, even though Joe, like an hour previous to the finish, was telling me, it looks like we're just going to have a normal, boring endurance race finish, no big fights or anywhere or anything like that. He was wrong, because they had quite a spectacular finish there. That was definitely the best finish at a Rolex I've ever remember. There's been some great ones while we've been there, but that one was pretty awesome. GTD was pretty interesting as well in the end. Lots of cars on the lead lap. I think there was like 6 cars still on the lead lap at the end, maybe more. Anyway, there was still quite a few cars in contention, and then strategy came down to the end of it as the fastest, actually not the fastest, just one of the Lamborghinis, not actually one of the quicker ones, just one of the ones that hadn't wrecked each other, had made it to the end, but they were short on fuel the whole stint, but they tried to stretch it out. Magnus was there with the new R8. They were also short on fuel, but in the end, they had a little bit of an on-track, racing each other back and forth, but the Lamborghini ran out, and the R8 ended up being able to finish, so that was a nice result there. It was interesting to watch. Didn't get as much TV coverage or kind of the attention because the Corvette Battle was so good. PC was there. Basically, all they did was wreck other people, break down, and none of them, I think, were even on the same lap at the end. There was PC has had some really great battles in the past. Not this year. It was pretty embarrassing for them, I think. There was nothing I can think of as a highlight for the PC cars. And from what I've seen on Reddit, Twitter, and everything, a lot of people agree. It was like, why were these cars even here? That was pretty ridiculous on their part. It fills the field. I mean, there is a need for that. I think there is a need for that entry-level prototype. But maybe it's time to retire the old PC cars. That's just starting to get a little sad. Speaking of retiring cars, this should be the last year we see the Daytona Prototypes. Maybe. Personally, I always thought the Daytona Prototypes were really cool. They filled a need we had here for road racing. Prototypes were non-existent in Grand Am at the period, and even in ALMS, there was less than a dozen of them racing. The DPs brought in a ton of cars. They were quick enough. They sounded great. They performed reliably. They were a great fill-in for prototypes for us. A lot of people say that the NASCAR that somewhat owns IMSA, somewhat owns the series. It's a very, very strange situation there. They say that the LMP2 cars, the traditional prototypes, have always been held back just to make the DPs relevant, and I think the DPs have gotten a very negative reputation because of that. In the end, I think the DPs will go down in history as a very important part of American road racing. I really don't think they're going to go away. They're going to still be around in some form or another, especially with all that's going on in prototype right now. The ACO and IMSA are not agreeing on the new LMP regulations or anything like that, so odds are, I think, we'll be seeing DPs again, probably next year. Maybe not in the premier class. Maybe they'll be nerfed or something and pushed down to where kind of PC is now. One way or another, I have a feeling we'll be seeing them again. Will we be seeing DPI next year, which is supposed to be the new LMP2 Daytona Prototype? It's all up in the air right now. We'll just have to stay tuned to the news and everything like that that's coming out about it. I have no idea. Hopefully they figure something out, because all of the shakeups that keep happening with this kind of stuff are what is stunting sports car racing's growth. I don't personally think the ACO has any interest in the best interests of American road racing. They want to see the World Endurance Championship do well. That's their focus. And LMP1 is the class that they're trying to promote. They want to try and beat F1. That's their goal right now. That's not where American road racing is right now. We need manufacturer and support and stuff like that at the LMP2 level, and they don't want to see that. So how that all shakes out, we will just have to wait and see. All right, there is all of the thoughts that I have kind of collected over the past couple days here of my impressions of what I saw in Rolex. Still, that is just kind of the things I took away from it as a series standpoint. Still an absolute blast to go there. If you ever have an opportunity to go to Daytona for the Rolex 24, make sure you do it. Or Sebring. I've never personally been to the Sebring 12-hour. It's on my bucket list. But it's a really great experience. If you've never seen sports car racing in person, I think you're going to be impressed with it. Just give them a break with the whole crowd control thing. Just be patient with that, because it's not going to be good. I suppose I did kind of forget to mention that an LMP2 car did win overall, HBD, which is a team that has struggled a lot over the years. It's not even really the same team anymore. It's just the same car that keeps getting new teams backing it. So it was good to see that car win. It was nice to see somebody new win. Not somebody I was really initially pulling for, but yeah, it was just nice to see new faces up at the top. And I guess that will do it for this time in Daytona. Let me know what your thoughts are on the Rolex, on the series and stuff like that, anything I covered. I'd love to hear your opinions on that. And I guess I'll see you in the next video.
Howdy.